Terrarian in the Dungeon, Chapter 28, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for listening and patreon.com/Azazyel to read all of his stories. The doors of the Loki Familia's meeting room were violently thrown open as Tiona, followed by Ace, stomped into the room. "Jake, there you are. We tried getting your goddess's attention around your weird tower, but no one wanted to mess with it because of the flowing lava." Tiona complained, and I nodded. "Keeping away people is the very reason my home is covered in lava. Can't evict me from my home if you can't actually evict me, can you?" I asked conspiratorially, and Tiona giggled as she shook her head. "Well, anyway, what do you need, Jake?" Tiona asked, and then likewise Ace spoke softly. "Did you have a stronger boss?" I shook my head to Ace before shrugging. "I mean, yes, I certainly do, but I haven't made the summon items for them. I have a plan in the dungeon in the works that will make transport and traveling issues through the dungeon an issue of the past," I said proudly, and I noticed Ace's hand on the tungsten broadsword tighten at the mention of the dungeon. "Anyway, I need an executive's help, especially a Loki Familia one, as I don't want to get involved in whatever drama is happening in the Freya Familia that's severe enough for Alan and Otter to be fighting in the dungeon," I explained, and the two girls shared looks. "Do you know what happened between Otter and Alan?" Ace asked me, but I shook my head saying all I knew was that Alan apparently disobeyed orders from Freya and Otter was pissed, to say the least. "Anyway, the problem is whenever I am actually tunneling through the dungeon to make the path between floors, the dungeon gets royally pissed off and spawned a black-enhanced aberrant monster party on my own party. Thankfully, it was only dungeon lizards, but if it were an army of war shadows, that could have been dangerous." I sighed, and the girls nodded in understanding. "Yeah, these new weird aberrant and mutated monsters are a major pain. But thankfully they are worth more hee. Anyway, Ace, you want to help Jake with this?" Tiona asked Ace, and before the blonde could verbally answer, despite her simple nod, another person stomped into the room. "Wait just a minute. I cannot be the only one hearing about enhanced monsters that should only spawn in the presence of a deity, correct? And yet you fools wish to push through such monsters." From the ajar door came the mother of the Loki Familia alongside Tiona, the bustier Amazon sister. "Riveria," I said in greeting, drawing her eyes to me. "I do not wish to push through them but think. If the Loki and other familias had an easy tunnel in which they could ride carts down from the top floor of the dungeon down to Rivera without having to deal with a single monster or the obnoxious stairs that make taking carts of supplies into the dungeon such a pain, how valuable and useful would that be? To say nothing of the hours it would shave to get to and from Rivera to the surface," I pointed out, and Riveria frowned. "Plus, not to mention, before Rivera, the dungeon has literally zero record of ever even with a couple gods flexing their arcanum summoning an actual juggernaut, as the floors literally are too small for such a monster to freely move, as they cannot get into the hallways between the chambers and the deeper floors," I explained, with Riveria grudgingly nodding in acceptance to my words. "That is true. Fine, I and the rest of these executives have the rest of the day and tomorrow free after getting well ahead of our expedition planning," Riveria said before adding on as an afterthought, "disregarding how you can actually break the dungeon enough to build tunnels through it. But how in the world are you building a tunnel that cannot close?" she asked. I stood up with Ace and Tiona standing up beside me as Riveria had all but taken over the negotiating for this work in a dungeon. "I don't know about you, Riveria, but when I make something, I want it to last. When I build something, whether it be a weapon, armor, clothes, or even an outhouse, I always make sure to throw on my own version of the Durandal enchantment that all but freezes the item in time so it cannot be changed in any way, shape, or form," I said before looking at Ace. "Ace, have you had a single issue with your sword?" I asked, and Ace nodded, making me blink in surprise. "Yes, the shape, weight, and sharpness are terrible. But I like how it cannot break," Ace said, nodding to me in appreciation as Tiona giggled in the background at my face. I brushed my hand down my face as I deadpanned. "In that case, I should just give you a stick that cannot break," I muttered, but Riveria heard my words and took them seriously. "Actually, blunted wooden training weapons would be a worthy purchase to make. So after we assess your dungeon plan, we can discuss such an order of training weapons," Riveria said seriously, and I wanted to shoot her with the slime gun I had in my inventory. But taking it out in a room filled with only women? Yeah, I would like to see the coming day, as they would just need to roll up my corpse in the carpet before burying me in the backyard of the estate. Whatever. Come on, Jake, let's get going into the dungeon. Tiona said excitedly, and I nodded as there wasn't anything else to say other than some small talk that would inevitably take place in the space between floors. By the way, just a heads up, my party member is the sole member of the Hestia Familia, of which the Familia is temporarily staying with mine as they had a bit of an incident when Otter and Alan were fighting. Apparently, somehow a damned aberrant minotaur got to the upper floors and well, Belle found it. I explained in preparation for meeting Belle, and Ace perked up. Ah, that white-haired boy I saved from another minotaur? She asked, and I nodded, and she frowned with sorrow clear in her eyes as she sighed. Ah, I am sorry for his passing if he was your friend, Ace said awkwardly, and my face froze before I couldn't help but giggle. Well, it's complicated, but yeah. Belle is still alive, though I had to kill that minotaur and that wasn't fun at all. I couldn't help but brush my hands over my chest, where I could feel the phantom pain of my ribs being heavily bruised due to being smashed by the minotaur. How long have you even been an adventurer? Riveria asked the pressing question, and I whistled. Man, I think it's been a week and a half, but it's not like I decided to punch out the minotaur. I fully took advantage of my chantless magic to drown it in a magical blast, although it got a couple hits in on me. I was the one to walk away, I said proudly, and I noticed both Tioni and Tiona giving me looks of interest in the Amazon sense, even if Tioni's were more of a look of taking note of my potential. Tioni was still firmly interested in her eternal Shota captain, who was literally 41 years old in comparison to Tioni's current age of only 17. Who had zero interest in her and only wanted to find a strong Paolum to marry to help with his quest to bring up the Paolum people. The path of magic is the path of ultimate strength in the world, Jake. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer. An aspiring mage despite you not walking the orthodox path of magic. Riveria offered freely, and I wanted to ask her how her 9 spells were going when I could pull out literally more than a couple hundred different magical items that had pre-programmed spells within them. Instead, I had a better question to ask rather than insulting her for being beholden to the stupid Damachi magic system. Riveria, what would you do for a secondary magical energy pool within yourself so you could more freely cast magic? I mean, the limited mind pool within mages is literally their greatest weakness once they have companions and can use concurrent chanting so they can dodge and still fight. I asked, and Riveria gave me a dumbfounded look before she shook her head, sending the curls of green hair that escaped her loose ponytail flying about. Jake, I fully acknowledge you to be an unmatched craftsman besides gods and possibly some spirits, but giving or creating a new mana pool within someone is impossible. The Elvish race has done studies upon such a topic for dozens of millennia and has broken no ground other than storing mana inside some extremely rare gems, but the mana within the gems will break down the very gems, so it's just not worth it. Riveria said hotly, and I smiled with the cockiest grin imaginable. Yeah. About that. Oh, looky, there's my bestie Belle, I said, ignoring Riveria, who squawked in outrage as she was wise enough to see my shit-eating grin as proof on how I was beyond proud to have gotten something over the normally so damned haughty about their superiority with magic elves. I all but skipped towards Belle, who noticed me waving to her, and as she smiled seeing me, her eyes widened as she noticed the party behind me, and most noticeably her previous crush Ace Wallenstein. Ace. Jake Ace. Belle said utterly spastically as she bowed to Ace and me before turning to flee, but I grabbed her by the back of her backpack with both my hands and literally just lifted her off the ground as she ran fruitlessly in place for a couple of moments before she realized that, no, she wasn't running faster than the ground could support her, and instead she was off the ground and her backpack straps were lifting her armor-clad arms. Belle, say hello to the Loki Familia. May as well introduce yourself, I said, holding Belle in front of me so she died a little inside. She waved to the Loki Familia members, who frankly didn't care one whit about Belle as they thought she was just a huge fan of the Loki Familia and was just super nervous to be around them.